Welcome to the Ranchonomics Podcast, where we empower you to build a better ranch and transform your operations into a thriving business. I'm your host, John Haskell. Let's get started. All right, welcome to the Ranchonomics Podcast. I have the good fortune today to be joined by Alex McKiernan, who is going to serve as a co-host today, and John Locke. And I got a wonderful message from Alex a few weeks ago about an idea for a podcast he had. Part of what we're going to do today is add John Locke to this conversation and talk a little about what he does. So John, good morning. Nice to have you. Alex, good morning. Nice to have you.
Morning, John. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Alex has been on before, so we've heard his intro. If you haven't, go back and listen to the episodes with he and his wife, Chloe Deagle, from a few months ago. John, give us a quick introduction. Where are you from? What do you do? That sort of thing.
I'm a sixth-generation rancher on the Gulf Coast of Texas. That's really not the reason why I'm here today. The reason why I'm here today is because I'm an instructor with RMC, teach the Ranching for Profit School, and also do quite a bit of facilitation, a little bit of coaching, that sort of stuff. I've been doing that for about 5 years now.
Excellent. And you enjoy work in the areas that most of us find very challenging, which I think is why your services are fairly popular. So, Alex, get us started here. What were you thinking about having this conversation? I'm excited to get started here.
Yeah, well, I'm glad. Thank you for inviting me. I primed you guys to have a conversation, and then I got invited in, so I'm flattered. I was at a meeting for Turner Ranches a while back and given a presentation of my own, and just really impressed by their intentionality in trying to work on vision and deal with the challenges of succession and those sorts of things. And it got me thinking a lot about my experiences with John in the room in difficult conversations. And John and I have also worked together on like large scale vision projects with lots of people and just always been really impressed with his abilities. And I wanted to hear from him about ranches that have been successful and in the succession issues and successful in dealing with complicated family relations, and just learn about what are the common threads and what are the things that the emotional and relationship kind of barriers and struggles that people have, because everybody's got relationships and everybody's got history in their businesses. So I wanted to hear from John about those things and see what people can learn and improve on their own.
Awesome. Very good. And I think most of us have the understanding that the sort of average case of how these topics are dealt with is not good. We see cases that are good, and to my mind, they're always exceptional. So let's jump in. So John, we kind of have chosen as our topic here the mindset and emotional barriers to succession. And I think this topic goes beyond succession, but it certainly includes that. So why don't we jump in the work that you're doing with people? Where do those conversations start, and how do we set ourselves up for a successful outcome?
That's a great question, John. This is a really deep subject. And when you ask the question, where do those conversations start? They always start from somebody feeling the need for a change. And change is such a terrifying word in society today that most people would just as soon, not attempt to change, not to attempt to do anything different. Let's just keep limping along and try to make things comfortable. And in reality, they're incredibly comfortably uncomfortable. And so usually what I see is there is somebody that takes a level of extreme ownership and leadership, and they see the need for the change, and they're incredibly frustrated and don't know how to do it. And typically they reach out to me. And, every situation's different, but all of us here have been involved in family operations. And I think that it's kind of interesting, all of these parallels that exist throughout the universe. And my ability to help people or attempt to help people in these situations comes from my own experiences, right? And all of our own experiences shape our paradigm. And that's why we do the things that we do. And I think understanding that is at a base level. If you need to change, kind of understanding how it works. But I'm saying all that to kind of say that I went through a pretty wild succession event with my dad and his siblings before I went to the Ranching for Profit School. Kind of turned the business upside down and was incredibly emotional and frustrating for several years. And then once we got out the other side of that and started having to take ownership because we were the only ones in the business, it kind of forced us into a position where we had to make changes. So as I continue to make changes and I continue to try to change the business, and I look forward to succession with my own family, I sort of attempted to reverse engineer it and look back at what had happened to us and the things that we had experienced, and tried to do a lot of studying on how do we prevent this. And then somehow, I think it's Bob Proctor has the quote, "You can only connect the dots looking backwards." Somehow that put me in a position to learn to start to help other people. That's not really what I set out to do. Basically an attempt to solve my own problems.
Yeah, and a realization that those solutions probably have much broader application than not only just your situation, but even more than succession, right? That we have these issues, so many complex issues. And I love how you started with the fact that change is the constant. That's the place where human problems often become, sort of come front and center, if you will, is when we have to navigate change.
Well, that changes. The need for change is constant, right? Everybody needs something different and changing, but that uncertainty is really difficult for people to deal with, and it's frightening.
And let's go to frightening. So that's the first part. So most of the time, I think we are afraid, right? We are nervous about what could possibly happen. We don't know what the outcomes are. Is that often what is driving people's emotional reaction? Is it fear that's the fundamental process there, or the fundamental emotion?
Well, it is for most people, or for a lot of people. And if you'll give me a little liberty, I want to back up just a little bit, because you've brought up emotions. And we all know that the best way to get a bunch of ranchers to the table to solve a problem is to make sure they know we're going to talk about their emotions, right? So
me chief among them, I'll just tell you. I have 3 emotions: tired, hungry, mad.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I hate to talk about it, but it's just such an interesting conversation, and it's so important. I was at a meeting a while back facilitating for a really awesome group of people, and somebody stood up and made the comment when things got really emotional in the room, and they had these hunches that this is the way they needed to move forward with the business, and we just need to do this, and there was all these things coming up, and they stood up and they said, we need to learn how to control our emotions or stamp down our emotions so that we can move forward with courage. And one of the coolest parts about me getting to work with people is I kind of get to be that little pain in the room that can, they hire me to come in and be that guy, And I said, we need to stop. Let me challenge you. Let me push back. You could be right. But what happens if we understand those emotions? If we become aware of what the source of those are, and we can get down to the root, then we can move forward together without, frustration and resentment and all of these other things that person won and I lost. So understanding where the emotions are coming from is paramount. And I want to make the point that the way God designed our bodies and the way that we work is our brain is this amazing supercomputer that's there to help us make things easy, to solve problems, but mainly to make life easy for us. And so an emotion is an automatic response created by your brain that's flooding your body with chemicals to help set you up to just deal with this problem. And that trigger could have got set ages and ages ago. So whenever we start talking about barriers, that's one of the biggest barriers is we just go with our emotions and we don't stop to investigate, where they're coming from. And then that brings in communication. That's one of the most common threads that I see for success is good communication, intentional communication. And then one of the biggest common threads in failure is lack of communication, people not understanding how to listen to understand, not being intentional with their communication.
I don't meet anybody that says they have enough good what-be meetings. Most of us don't spend enough time working on the business. At ranching.fyi, we've developed the Meet Right course to help you be effective with daily meetings, weekly meetings, and quarterly and annual strategic meetings. Look up ranching.fyi, Meet Right.
So let's tie those things a little bit together. I love this idea, and I think it was years ago I learned, you shouldn't. It's not about ignoring your emotions or controlling them, but it is about understanding them. Maybe we control them at some level, right? But the understanding is what really drives us forward often. But we do not necessarily want to communicate when our emotion, or we communicate more effectively maybe when our emotions aren't running at the highest possible level, right? So help me a little with that. Where how do we go from understanding and examining our emotions from a maybe from a 20,000 foot view or from outside ourselves necessarily, to then how we change into helpful communication as opposed to destructive communication?
That's a great question. I want everybody to understand that this is not some, super simple way you just do this, do A, and then B happens, and so on and so forth. But I think I can give some helpful suggestions. So anytime you're dealing with people, it takes extreme ownership on all sides, and we have to understand that we can only control ourselves. And if we have that mindset and we get into a difficult conversation, you're obviously going to have some level of emotions, right? So what it takes extreme ownership from the listener to try to understand and dig a little deeper and understand what could be driving the emotions from the person that they are, speaking with, that they're listening to, right? So if you approach that with a real sense of curiosity, that's going to lead to asking questions. And what we typically don't do when we ask questions is listen to understand. As soon as they get the first 3 words out of their mouth, we're listening to respond, and we have a comeback for them. So if the speaker understands that they need to be a part of this conversation in a constructive way, and yes, I am getting emotional, I am getting upset, maybe I need to take a deep breath, maybe I need to take a break. But if they understand that they need to take ownership of trying to express and answer these questions in good faith, and then you have that happening from the other side, that we're listening to understand, one of the best tools and a practical tool that everyone can use, and I think everyone should use, is the listener should have to repeat back what they heard from the speaker. And then they should have to get permission from the speaker. Yes, that's what I mean. That's what I said. And then, and only then, can you move on.
Yeah, I like that, John. That's a really practical way to not dig into the difficult emotional conversation necessarily, but just to hear, is this what you meant? Before I go off, before I make a decision, is this what you meant? This is what I heard. I like that.
Yeah.
And in that reflective listening process, every time I try to do that, I am amazed at how hard it is actually to hear what people are saying. And sometimes it's a matter of they could do a little bit of a better job, expressing it, or they're trying to express it. And, we need some refinement there. And then often how bad I am at listening. Like, well, I thought I heard you say this, and I'm ready to go off on this direction, responding to something that you said that I understood, blah, blah, blah. And then it's like, well, that's not actually what I meant at all. And it's like, oh boy, this conversation just didn't even need to take that whole detour. Every time I forget to do that, to check in, just to have that moment of like, all right, are we on the same place? It's like, oh no, we're like 2 clicks away. We're going to get back on, and then we can actually have the real conversation, right?
Yeah, and you have no idea how many times I've been trying to facilitate effective communication for people, and somebody slams their hand down and they say, "That's not what I said." And my answer to that is, "But that's what they heard." Okay, so let's go a little deeper. Let's try to work through this together, and it's incredibly effective.
Very interesting. Okay, so reflective listening and curiosity are 2 things there to me that are really fascinating. You've mentioned, I do want to just point out real quickly, we'll probably mention these again at the end. You've mentioned 2 resources already. One, I'm assuming this is intentional. You've mentioned Extreme Ownership, which is a book by Jocko Willink, which if anybody hasn't read it, wonderful book. You also mentioned The Listening to Understand, which comes from Steve Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Are there any other resources we want to touch on before we keep going here?
Mandatory reading for the human race should be Leadership and Self-Deception. It's written by the Arbinger Institute.
That's a good one.
I try to pick that up about once every 6 months and reread it, because I'll think, oh, yeah, I'm not applying these principles as well as I thought I was in my life. So
yeah, I want to follow up on that, John, because I think leadership and self-deception is a great tool for all of these conversations, because usually what happens is that you've got a story built up about this family member or this business associate, and that story that you have for them and the story they have for you dictates the conversation. And it's all about getting out of the box, leadership and self-deception. And I'm pretty sure that Stephen Covey was part of that research group or did research with those folks. He may have even started that group. I'm not sure. He was definitely involved. I don't know if we want to move to this part of the conversation, but another one of those 7 habits is starting with the end in mind. And I wonder, that comes in at some point here. I don't know if you want to go there now, John Haskell, but
yeah, well, let's do that, because I think part of what you've talked about and what we've started to sort of talk our way around a little bit is that there are a lot of things. When I think of ranches, right, we often think of multi-generational businesses, right? John, you said 6th generation down there in Texas. Alex, you guys are relatively on the new end of that spectrum, right?
absolutely.
Starting from the beginning, when we start a business like this, whether it's already a multi-generational ranch or we're starting from scratch, we often are trying to build something that we want to be able to leave as a legacy. We are trying to build a legacy. And what's fascinating to me in ranching is that so often we see a visionary family member start that business, get going down that path, and then it's completely undone by every interpersonal interaction that they have after that, right? There are people, and I think of people I've known whose grandfathers and great-grandfathers were incredibly good at assembling land, right, and assembling livestock. And I think at, operations in Nevada, right, where they had, at one point, thousands of sheep and covered huge land areas. And it's fascinating to me because then they turn around and do every interpersonal thing they possibly could do to completely undermine the fact that this is going to become a legacy, right? And I think over and over again, what is required for that legacy to actually carry on for more than one generation isn't just the building of a good business, right? But it then comes with all these relationships and all these other things that we have to layer on. So, Alex, I think if that's the direction you're thinking, let's make a pivot there, because we have to add in the skills in our own set, or at least the parts of that are going to make us successful over the much longer term. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah. You've got about 5 topics there that you just went through. So if I could just kind of speak on that, I hear what you're saying, John. And one of the biggest challenges, the emotional and mindset barriers to successful succession, is a misunderstanding of what the legacy is, was, or should be. And part of what Alex is introducing in the conversation, I feel like, is the power of vision. So those are kind of sort of 2 different topics, but it's so fascinating to me as you watch these families like you're talking about that end up falling apart. And quite often it's about a specific piece of property. It's about the physical assets of the empire. And it's not about the reason for that person setting out to build that empire. And if you really dig deep and you figure out what that is, then that helps you so much. Like that's so much more of a stable legacy. That's a kind of an unbreakable legacy that can be created. And I'll just give the quick example of our family. When we say 6th generation, nobody came here to our area for the favorable weather and the beautiful scenery. Like if you've ever been here, it's pretty rough, right? And we're still here. And if you ask a lot of our family members about our family legacy, it would have to do with Brahman cattle and Hungerford, Texas. And when I really drilled down on this years and years ago, I decided that our legacy was a legacy of being problem solvers in agriculture in difficult environments, right? And I could probably carry that anywhere in the world and still honor what our forefathers did. But if it's just about Brahman cattle and Hungerford, Texas, when urban encroachment gets us, our legacy dies. So I think that I would challenge all of your listeners to define what their family's legacy was or their business legacy is, independent of assets. In Dave's Profit Tips Collection book, it's page 157. I almost know the whole story by heart, but it's a tale of 2 legacies. I would challenge everybody to get that book if you don't have it, but to go read that story. That's super, super important to me. You also brought up, John, the interpersonal skills, and these people are building these empires, and they're not in agriculture because they love communicating with people or they love being around people. And so they don't necessarily develop those skills. I think some of that goes back to, when you're talking about family members, that goes back to communication. That goes back to that intentionality and being clear, because so many times, what's the quote? Expectations are the seeds of resentment, or expectations are just future resentment. And so we have these ranches and everybody just expects that they're going to be an error. Everybody expects this is the way that it's going to happen. And we're not operating with clearly laid out, clearly defined, written goals and expressions of how we want things to look. And everybody's just sort of either expecting something, or they're dealing with these emotions and these scars. And somebody said something earlier in this conversation about telling ourselves a story. And I don't know if kids do this anymore, but remember when we used to have to play telephone every once in a while in school, and we would learn how gossip
back
worked?
in the olden days.
Yeah. So many times this emotional thing is like telephone with no words. You tell yourself a story about, well, this happened because of this, and this person feels this way, without actually talking about it and actually communicating and figuring out what's really going on. And the reason why we do that is because we're just built to make things simple. And this kind of goes back to that conversation about the brain and how we would just prefer for everything to be easy. And we tell ourselves these stories, we have all of these emotions, and we just roll with it. And it's very dangerous.
Mm-hmm. Okay, here's what I want to do. I want to take a break here. We are going to come back next week and continue this conversation. I am really glad the two of you have joined us. Alex, super thankful for you inspiring this idea, and John, very willing for your time. So real quick, before I let you guys go today, John, where can people find you? Where can people learn more? Oh, and there's one more book we mentioned, which was Dave Pratt's Profit Tips book that is available for sale from RMC, right? So how do people get a hold of that?
It's Healthy Land, Happy Families, Profitable Businesses is the name of the book. One of the easiest ways to find me is on JCL Businesses on Facebook. That's sort of a clearinghouse for some of the enterprises that I'm involved with, including the facilitation and coaching, but obviously our Brahmin genetics and a few other things. So they can find me there, or at John, John, C as in Charlie, Locke, LOCKE at hotmail.com. People can reach out to me directly via email.
Cool. And you do facilitation services kind of on a contract basis, or for people that need help, that sort of thing, right?
Yes, sir. I do quite a bit of that.
Very good. Okay, we'll come back and continue this conversation. I think we've opened a bit of a Pandora's box here, so we're gonna have to break some things apart. So fantastic. Alex, thank you again. Alex, your website again is where?
RobinetteFarms.com.
Love it, in there in southeast Nebraska. So thank you, gentlemen. We will talk in a week.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Thank you, John.
Thank you for tuning into the Ranchnomics podcast. We hope this episode helped you win today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share it with a friend.